welcome back. Although my work involves lots of different areas, I have kind of a special draw to parenting topics. And that probably has lots to do with my own personal life, my own family life. And Jay, I want to talk a little bit about a topic within that area with you that I hope is going to be useful. But I'll be honest with you, it's a little bit of a gamble for me. I'm doing a little bit of a stretch. What I want to talk about today is technology use within the home. And most specifically, I want to talk to you kind of about a policy or guidelines for your home. One of the difficulties with this is that technology is changing so quickly all the time that it makes it difficult for us to be able to anticipate some of the expectations that we are going to have later on or some of the issues that may come up. And individual homes and expectations validly have differences. I think there are some good things that are kind of required by all homes, by all families, but there's a lot of variation as well. And so what I want to do today is just go over the policy that we have traditionally used in our home. It's changed a bit over time, its implementation has changed, all kinds of things that vary over time have taken place with it. But I thought I might look at the different points within it and just give to parents some ideas that they can think about, maybe even discuss with their own children as you might develop your own policy or guidelines for your home. So one of the things that we do is we talk about, well, what are the things that are governed by this policy? What are electronic devices? And again, that changes a lot. So when our policy was first made, there were some things that were more common. So we talked about MP3 players. MP3 players essentially don't exist anymore. They now have gone, they're integrated with iPhones. We even talked about iPods. iPods are not very common anymore either. So we talked about it being, referring to computers, laptops or desktops, cell phones in general, but especially to smartphones, iPads and so on. We talked about the idea that if there are any exceptions to the policy, because a policy I think should be flexible, it needs to be talked about. We can't just assume that things are okay. We gave time limits. And for us, the time limits were based on whether it was a school night or the next day was not a school day. And so we allowed more time on days or evenings before school. When we talked about using devices for homework, which more and more teachers are integrating into the work that's expected of our children, when it's being used for homework, then we generally said we don't consider that to be part of the time that's allowed to you, because time is one of the factors that we considered in terms of the use. We also didn't think that use of a device for music generally was counted. Now that can become abusive as well, so over time the music can start to be used kind of all the time. It can also be disruptive to the home, especially if it's going to be played out loud. At the same time, we don't want our children isolated from us, and so we've generally said as well that if there's a reason to wear earbuds, one earbud only, so that you also have some connection to the people that are around you, so that there can be communication if need be, and that the volume level should be appropriate. Again, that's a judgment call. That if music is being used during work, our preference is, we're willing to talk about it, but our preference is that it's not lyrical music. So it's jazz, it's classical, but it's not using words, because words tend to attract our brain's attention when it's supposed to be doing something else productive. When it comes to device use, especially for laptops, we want our children to use those devices in more public areas. So we put down, for instance, we would prefer that you used a device in a living room rather than a bedroom. At the dining room table is a better place than you being someplace else that's isolated where nobody else is around. And we're pretty open about the discussion with our children about why we have these things in place, and that also encourages them to bring up their concerns and for us to modify the policy. Yeah, it partially is about what they might encounter as they're using the technology, but very, very much of this is guided by us wanting to have contact with them, for them to feel actively engaged in the family, and for us to be able to have the relationship furthered by that connection. We also talk about our expectations for device uses away from our home. Not something that we can actually control, but that they are then aware this is what mom and dad would like. This is and the reasons why they want this to be done. So we want minimal device use away from home, and especially for younger children, that might even mean that your device is not taken out of the home. Especially with younger children, that if my wife and I are both out of the house, then devices are generally not allowable, that we're not using those devices. We also believe very strongly in the idea that it's more important to be present with people. And so part of our policy is that you do not use a device if we have company. So people from outside of our home, people who don't live within our home, if they are present in our home, the general expectation is you're not using your device, including if the company is on a device. And because we don't want to just go with the lowest common denominator. So if somebody else does something, you feel like therefore it gives you entitlement to be able to do that. We want to ask our children to have higher expectations and higher requirements of themselves. We put down that we want them to not use electronics before going to church on Sunday mornings. We don't want them to use electronics at least an hour before bedtime, so they're shut down there. There's both physiological reasons for that, but there's also just routine reasons for that, for them to be able to be engaged in the process of what does it mean to settle myself and to get ready for this next major activity that's going to take place. We have a general expectations that if there is something that you can do that is not electronic, we generally are going to prefer that over the electronics use. Before using a device in the morning, there are expectations about what they should be done, how they should ready for their day, whether it's a school day or otherwise. And when they get home from school, there are expectations about what also should take place before they start making use of a device. We also have policy about what we call viewers. So those daughters who watch somebody else using a device, which is kind of even more of a waste than being on a device yourself, merely playing a game. Which is not to say that we think playing a game is a waste of time in itself. We do it ourselves, but to keep things within limits and to establish some good habits. So we don't want our daughters watching their sisters do something else, play something else. We also have, over time, and it's not something we've added into the policy at this point, but over time we've noticed that more and more we spend time looking at a video that somebody has found. Let me show you this video. Let's talk about this. We're not even talking about it. Let's just look at it. Let's laugh and then let's move on. There is some value in sharing memes and finding things funny and informative and so on, but we don't want it to be so tied to this object, right? We want them to recognize their efficacy away from this thing. We want the devices stored. So when it's shutdown time, the devices are supposed to be left in a common place. So actually, right now, because we have adult daughters, we have in our home, we have some different expectations for them as part of a negotiation between recognition of their maturity, but also that they're living within our home and for themselves, as well as for their example to their sisters, their younger sisters. We try to work out kind of something in common there. But at least for the youngest daughters, their devices come into my office at the end of the day. Right now I've got most of them with me. I know one daughter has taken a device because she's going to FaceTime family. And that is also something that in general is not part of their device use time, right? So if you are going to be in contact with family, whether it's household family who's out of the home for some reason or with your extended family, then we encourage that. So that basically is a good use of your time. Devices are not supposed to be stored or used in bedrooms. And then the last piece that we've got there is abuse of the letter and or spirit of this policy can easily result in suspended use and or permanent loss of individual devices. We've never done permanent loss. We have had suspension of use for a little while in order basically just to underscore that something was important to us and that we want to have a change take place in that. As I've said kind of earlier on, I think it's important that especially with older children, this is a process of mutuality, that there is discussion where you try to understand one another. There may be disagreement, but you can arrive at something at the end. And how you arrive at that something has to be kind of up to the individual household. On the one hand, I certainly do believe that parents, for the most part, are making decisions for their younger children, those children that are especially underage. But even children that are legally mature, if they're living within our home, I think we have a responsibility to them and to the other children that they also can affect. So these are just some things for you guys to think about. We encourage you to reach out to us if you've got any specific questions, but hopefully these are helpful.